The cold was the first thing she remembered, not the biting chill of a winter draft, but the deep, bone-settling cold of stone that had absorbed centuries of damp and despair. Elara's cheek pressed against the flagstones of the dungeon floor, and she could feel every crack, every uneven edge, every grain of grit that had ground into her skin over the long, endless days of her captivity. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, each one a battle won against the weight pressing down on her chest. She had stopped counting the days, somewhere around the third week, when the light from the single, bay-rayed window had begun to blur into a perpetual gray twilight. Time had lost all meaning. All that remained was the ache of starvation, the burn of her shackled wrists, and the hollow echo of her own heartbeat in the silence. She tried to move, to shift her weight onto her elbows, but her body refused to obey. Her limbs were sticks, brittle and useless. The muscles she had once been so proud of long since consumed by the ravenous hunger that gnawed at her insides. Her gown, once a rich brocade of burgundy silk, hung in tatters from her skeletal frame, the fabric crusted with dirt and old blood. She was a ghost of the woman she had been, a specter haunting the living world with no strength left to haunt anything at all. But she remembered, oh, how she remembered. The betrayal had been so exquisitely crafted, so perfectly timed, that she had not seen it coming until the blade was already at her throat. It had begun with a whisper, a soft, insidious murmur that had wormed its way into her husband's ear. Julian had always been ambitious, his hunger for power as vast as the kingdom he coveted, but Elara had believed foolishly, naively, that her love had been enough to temper his greed. She had given him everything, her dowry, her lands, her body, her heart, and he had taken it all with a smile on his handsome face and a promise on his lips. The promise had been a lie. She could still see the moment of revelation with painful clarity, the grand hall of her own ancestral home, the family seat that she had inherited from her mother. The court had gathered for the Harvest festival, a celebration of bounty and unity. Elara had stood at Julian's side, her head held high, her hand resting in his. She had been so proud, so certain of her place in the world, and then the doors had burst open, and the king's guards had flooded in, their armor gleaming with the cold light of betrayal. Lady Elara Valcourt, the captain had intoned, his voice flat and unfeeling. You are hereby charged with high treason against the crown. You are accused of conspiring with enemy agents to undermine the kingdom's security. By order of His Majesty, you are to be stripped of your titles, your lands, and your freedom, and imprisoned pending trial. The words had fallen like stones, each one crushing a piece of her soul. She had turned to Julian, seeking comfort, seeking protection, seeking the man who had promised to love her until the end of time, but he had not met her eyes. He had stepped back, his hand slipping from hers, and she had seen the flicker of satisfaction in his gaze, the barely concealed triumph that twisted his lips into a cruel mockery of a smile. I am's, my love, he had murmured, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I never suspected. I trusted you. I believed in you. He had shaken his head, the picture of a grieving husband, and Elara had felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had tried to speak, to protest, but the guards had already seized her arms, and the words had died in her throat. And then Mira had stepped forward, her half-sister, her dearest friend, the girl she had raised from childhood. Mira had been weeping, her face a mask of anguish, her tears falling like jewels onto the stone floor. Oh, how could you, she had sobbed, her voice crying through the silent hall. I loved you, we all loved you, and you betrayed us. You betrayed everything we stood for. Elara had stared at her, uncomprehending, as the pieces had begun to click into place. The whispered conversations she had overheard but dismissed, the sudden shift in Julian's affections, his eyes lingering on Mira a moment too long, the accidental poisoning that had cost her the child she had carried, a loss that had left her hollow and grieving, too weak to fight. It had all been a plan, ruthless scheme to strip her of her power and deliver it into the hands of those who had smiled at her while she was sharpening their knives. Elara had whispered, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this? Mira had stepped closer, close enough that only Elara could see the cold, glittering hatred in her eyes. Because you have always been the favored one? She had hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. The beautiful, beloved firstborn, the heir to everything. You had it all, and you never once thought to share it. You offered me scraps, Elara, and I am done with scraps. The guards had dragged her away, and the last thing she had seen was Julian's hand reaching out to clasp Mira's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture of red triumph. They had sealed her fate with a kiss, a final act of cruelty that had burned itself into her memory like a brand. The trial had been a farce. The evidence had been manufactured, the witnesses bribed, the verdict predetermined. Elara had been convicted of treason, her titles stripped, her lands forfeited to the crown. Julian had been rewarded for his loyalty with a dukedom, and Mira had been elevated to his side as his new wife. They had moved into her home, slept in her bed, worn her jewels. They had erased her from the world as if she had never existed. And then they had thrown her into this dungeon, this cold dark hell, and left her to rot. She had fought at first, screaming her innocence to the Unca ring walls, pounding her fists against the iron bars until her knuckles were raw and bleeding. But no one had come, no one had listened. Her friends had abandoned her, terrified of being tainted by association. Her father, the man who had raised her, had refused to see her, claiming that her betrayal had broken his heart. He had died a month later, leaving everything to Mira, and Elara had wept tears of rage and grief until there were no tears left. The days had blurred into weeks, the weeks into months. She had grown thin and weak, her spirit fading with each passing hour. The only visits she received were from the jailer, a brutish man who took pleasure in her suffering, who reminded her daily that she was forgotten, condemned to die alone in the dark. But it was the 4th month that had broken her. A child had been born, not hers, never hers. The child she had lost had been stolen from her womb, a casualty of Mira's poison. But a child had arrived in the world. Squalling boy with a shock of dark hair and a cry that echoed through the halls of the palace. Elara had heard the news from the jailer, who had delivered it with a sneer. Your husband's new wife has given him a son, he had said, his voice dripping with malice, a fine. Already been named heir to the dukedom. The old duke, your father, would be proud. The words had been a knife twisting in her chest. Julian had a son, Mira had given him a son. The child she had dreamed of, the future she had planned, had been stolen and given to another. She had collapsed onto the stone floor, her body racked with sobs, and she had not risen again. The days that followed were a blur of fever and delirium. She had stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped fighting. She had let herself slip into the abyss, her mind drifting through memories of a life she would never have again. She remembered her mother's face, soft, before the fever had taken her. She remembered the gardens of her childhood, the scent of roses in the summer heat, the sound of birdsong. She remembered Alexander, the prince who had looked at her with such warmth, before she had chosen Julian over him. She had been such a fool, and now she was dying alone and forgotten, her name erased from the histories, her legacy, her body rotting in a cell that smelled of mold and excrement. The injustice of it burned through her, a fire that refused to die even as her body began to fail. She had loved them, trusted them, given them everything. And they had repaid her with treachery and murder. The last night had been the worst. She had heard footsteps in the corridor, measured and deliberate, and she had known, with the clarity of the dying, that they had come to finish what they had started. Julian and Mira had entered her cell, their faces aglow with the golden light of the torch they started. They had looked down at her, their eyes cold and pitiless, and Elara had forced herself to meet their gaze. You look terrible, Sister Mira had said, her voice soft and mocking. It seems the dungeon does not agree with you. Elara had laughed, rattling sound that had torn at her throat. You have won, she had rasped. You have everything you wanted. Why are you here to gloat? Are you here to say goodbye? Julian had replied, his tone calm and businesslike. You have served your purpose, Elara. Your land has been divided, your name blackened, your legacy erased. There is nothing left to take from you. But we cannot have you lingering, can we? A woman with your knowledge, your grudges, you might become a liability. He had drawn a small dagger from his belt, the blade gleaming in the torchlight. Elara had felt a strange calm settle over her. A final acceptance of the fate she had been running from for so long. She would not beg, she would not plead. She would face her death with the dignity they had tried so hard to strip from her. Julian, she had said, her voice steady despite the weakness in her limbs. I hope the crown you have won is worth the blood you have spilled. I hope every victory you claim tastes like ash in your mouth, and I hope that one day, when you least expect it, the world will turn on you as you have turned on me. Julian's face had flushed with anger, and Mira had laid a restraining hand on his arm. Do not let her bait you, she had murmured. She is nothing, a ghost. Let her go to her grave with her bitterness. She had stepped closer, her eyes boring into Elara's. The world will remember me, sister. It will remember how I rose from the shadows of your greatness, and it will forget you. It has already forgotten you. Elara had smiled. bitter smile that had split her cracked lips. "The world forgets nothing," she had whispered, "and I will be back, perhaps not in this life but in another, and when I return, I will burn your kingdom to the ground." Mira had laughed, a tinkling, musical sound that had echoed off the dungeon walls. "You are mad," she had said. "And soon, you will be dead." Julian had stepped forward, his dagger raised, and Elara had closed her eyes. She had felt the cold steel press against her throat, and she had whispered a final prayer to the gods she had long since stopped believing in. And then there had been pain, sea winding. She had felt the hot rush of blood pour from her throat, had felt the strength drain from her body as her life poured out onto the stone floor. She had collapsed, her face pressed into the cold, and she had felt the world begin to fade. But in the darkness, as her consciousness slipped away, she had seen a flash of light, a brilliant, golden light that had pierced the shadows and wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She had heard a voice, soft and familiar, calling her name, and she had felt herself rising, ascending, pulled upward by a force she could not resist. The light had been blinding, and she had struggled against it, clinging to the remnants of her life, desperate for one more moment, one more breath, but the light had been relentless, and it had drawn her in, swallowing her whole. And then she had opened her eyes. A soft, warm bed, with silk sheets and a canopy of embroidered velvet. The scent of roses drifted through the open window, and the morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. Her bed, the bed she had shared with Julian before the betrayal, before the poison, before everything had fallen apart. Elara sat up so suddenly that the world swam around her. She pressed a hand to her throat, expecting to feel the gash, the blood, the cold finality of death, but her skin was smooth and whole. Her hair, long and thick and auburn, fell over her shoulders in a cascade of silk. Her body was strong, her limbs sturdy, her belly flat and unarmed. She stared at her hands, turning them over in the sunlight, and she felt the tears begin to fall. They were not tears of grief or sorrow, but of joy, of relief, of a fierce, burning hope that she had thought was dead. She was alive, she was whole, and she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had been given a second chance. The calendar on the writing desk caught her eye, and she rose from the bed, her bare feet pressing into the thick carpet. She crossed to the desk and read at the date, her heart pounding in her chest. It was the day of the Rebirth festival, the day Julian had publicly denounced her, the day Mira had stepped forward with her tears and her lies. She was back, she had returned to the beginning, and this time, she would not be fooled. Elara raised her eyes to the mirror that hung above the desk, and she studied her reflection with a cold, calculating. The woman who stared back was young, beautiful and unbroken, but her eyes held a fire that had not been there before. A fire born of betrayal, of suffering, of a vengeance that would not be denied. "They will pay," she whispered to her reflection, her voice trembling with the intensity of her promise. "Every last one of them, Julian, Mira. They will pay for what they have done to me. I will take everything from them, as they took everything from me, and when I am finished, they will know the taste of ash." She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling the steady rhythm of her pulse, and she smiled. It was not a kind smile, or a gentle one, it was a smile of pure rage, tempered by a patience that had been forged in the fires of hell. The game had begun, and Elara was ready to play. The morning light painted gold across the silk canopy as Elara sat motionless on the edge of her bed, her fingers tracing the embroidered falcon that adorned the coverlet. She had not slept. She had spent the night memorizing every detail of her chambers. The slight warp in the window frame where the wood had swollen from rain, the faint discoloration on the tapestry where the sun had faded the threads over years, the precise way the shadows fell across the writing desk at midnight, all of it familiar, all of it hers, all of it taken from her in a life that had ended with steel and blood. She rose and walked to the mirror, studying the face that stared back at her, unlined. The hollows of starvation had not yet carved their marque into her cheeks. The grey pallor of death had not yet leached the color from her skin. She was 18 again. The age when she had still believed in love, still trusted the smiles that hid daggers. The woman in the mirror was a stranger now, a shell wearing her features, animated by a fire that had been kindled in the cold dark of a dungeon cell. A soft knock at the door shattered the stillness. Ilara's he writes. And for a moment she was back in that cell, listening to the footsteps that heralded her doom. But the knock came again, light and uncertain, and she forced herself to breathe. She said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The door swung open to reveal Liane, Bia rang a tray of steaming tea and fresh bread. The handmaiden's eyes were downcast, her movements seriful and deferential. Elara watched her set the tray on the table, noting the slight quiver in her fingers. The way she glanced toward the door as if expecting someone else to follow. "My lady," Lian murmured, curtsying low. "I have brought your morning repast. The mistress of the household sent word that she wishes to see you in the Solar after breakfast. She has matters to discuss regarding the Rebirth festival." Elara inclined her head, her eyes never leaving Lian's face. The woman was nervous, guilty. She had already been bought, Elara knew, though the transaction had likely not yet happened. In her former life, Mira had approached Lian the week before the festival, offering gold and promises in exchange for information. Lian had taken the bribe with really a flicker of hesitation, delivering details of Elara's movements, her thoughts, her vulnerabilities, all while playing the devoted servant. Elara said, her voice soft and almost kind, "You have served me since I was a child. Tell me, has anyone approached you recently? Anyone who wished to speak of me?" The handmaiden's face went pale, her hands clenching at her skirts. "My lady, no one has spoken to me." Elara smiled, a gentle, understanding smile that did not reach her eyes. "I see. I asked only because there have been whispers in the corridor. I would hate for you to feel pressured. Lian, you are more than a servant to me, you are a friend. I would never wish to see you trapped between loyalties." Lian's eyes widened, and a flush crept up her neck. "My lady, I would never betray you, never." "Of course you wouldn't," Elara said, picking up a piece of bread and breaking it with deliberate care. "You may go. Tell the mistress I will attend her shortly. And Lian, if anyone offers you gold or favors in exchange for information about me, I would be grateful if you would tell me. The court is a treacherous place, and I would not see you hire mead." The handmaiden fled the room as if the hounds of hell were at her heels, and Elara allowed herself a thin. The seed of doubt had been planted. Lian would think twice now before taking Mira's coin, and if she still did, Elara would know, because the fear in the woman's eyes would betray her. She dressed with care, selecting a gown of deep forest green, the color of ambition and survival. She braided her hair with her own hands, refusing the assistance that Lian would have offered, and pinned it in a coronet that framed her face like a crown. When she was finished, she looked every inch the lady of the house, the heir to the Valcourt legacy, the woman who would not be broken. The Solar was a grand room at the heart of the manor, lined with tapestries depicting the glories of House Valcourt's history. Lady Adelaide, her stepmother, sat in the high-backed chair by the window, her silver, threaded hair gleaming in the morning light. Beside her stood Mira, dressed in soft rose, her dark hair loose and artfully tumbling over her shoulders. Elara's father, Lord Edric, was conspicuously absent, a deliberate slight. She knew, a message that she was not worth his time. Adelaide said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Sit, we have much to discuss." Elara took the seat opposite them, folding her hands in her lap with practiced grace. "I am at your disposal, stepmother." Adelaide's eyes narrowed at the formality, but she pressed on. "The Rebirth festival approaches, as you know. Your father and I have decided that Mira will accompany the prince's hunting party this year. It is a signal honor, and we believe she will make an excellent impression." Elara inclined her head, hiding the surge of bitter satisfaction that rose in her chest. In her former life, she had been the one to ride with the prince. Mira had been relegated to the sidelines, a forgotten sister, and her jealousy had festered into betrayal. But this time, Elara had no intention of playing the jealous wife. "I think that is a wonderful idea," Elara said smoothly. "Mira will be a credit to the family. I am certain the prince will be charmed." Mira blinked, clearly thrown. She had expected resistance, tears, a demand for explanation. Elara watched her sister's confusion with quiet pleasure, filing away the details of her expression. The slight furrow between her brows, the way her lips pirouetted in surprise. "Truly?" Mira asked, her voice uncertain. "You do not mind?" "Why would I mind?" Elara replied, tilting her head. "The prince and I are old friends. But that does not mean I should monopolize his time. Besides, I have other matters to attend to, the household accounts for one. Father has been remiss in keeping them, and I feel it is my duty as the eldest daughter to ensure all is in order." Adelaide's composure cracked, just slightly. "The accounts are none of your concern. Your father handles the estate's finances." Elara said, her voice honeyed and sharp. "I have received word from the steward that there are discrepancies. Payments made to merchants who have not provided goods, expenditures that cannot be explained. I would hate for father's reputation to be tarnished by negligence. If he will not look into the matter, I will. Mira's eyes de-eroded to her mother, a flicker of panic passing between them. Elara stored that away too. The discrepancies had existed in her former life. Funds siphoned from the estate to finance Julian's ambitions, to buy Mira's jewels, to build their future at the expense of hers. She had not spoken then, too trusting. This time, she would pry open every drawer and let the rot see the light. You're overstepping, Adelaide said coldly. Your father is the head of this house, and his word is law. His word is law only as long as his word is just, Elara replied, rising from her chair. I am not a child, stepmother, I am the lady of this house, the heir to the Valcourt legacy, and I will not be sidelined or silenced. If there are secrets in this family, I will uncover them, and if there are crimes, I will expose them. She curtsied, a gesture of mock deference, and swept from the room before anyone could respond. The silence behind her was deafening, and she felt the weight of their stars pressing against her back like blades. Good, let them wonder, let them fear. The old Elara would have wept and pleaded. The new Elara would burn the house down and dance in the flames. She walked to the gardens, her steps measured and calm. The roses were in full bloom, their petals heavy with dew, and the scent of lavender filled the air. It was beautiful. This place that had been her sanctuary in the old life, the only corner of the manor where she had felt safe, now it felt like a gilded cage. And she was the bird who had lied to pick the lock. A figure approached from the direction of the eastern gate, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair ruffled by the morning breeze. Elara's breath caught as she recognized him. Prince Alexander, walking his expression rotted and distant. He had come to her home in the old life too, had visited on the eve of the festival, had arraigned her of Julian's ambition. She had laughed off his concerns, dismissed his caution as jealousy. She would not make that mistake again. Your Highness, she said, dropping into a curtsy. I did not expect to see you here. Alexander stopped, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart raw. I came to pay my respects to your father. I did not realize you would be in the garden, she replied, rising to meet his gaze. It is the one place in this house where I feel I can breathe freely. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. I have heard rumors, Elara, your husband. Julian is not here. She cut him off, her voice hard. He is still in the city, attending to business, but I am not his prisoner, your Highness. And I will not be treated as property. Alexander's jaw tightened. There are whispers that he has been meeting with the Duke of Ashford. My whispers that they are plotting something that involves you. Elara met his eyes and for a moment, she allowed him to see the fire that burned within her. She said softly, I know everything, and I am ready for them. He stared at her, shock and wonder mingling in his gaze. Elara, what happened to you? You seem different. She smiled, a dangerous smile that held no worth. I woke up, Alexander. I woke up to the truth, and I will never sleep again. The garden gate creaked, and they both turned to see Mira approaching, her face a mask of serene welcome. Your Highness, she called out, her voice lilting and sweet. What a pleasant surprise. I was just about to take a turn about the gardens myself. Would you join? Alexander's expression shuddered, polite and distant. I have already promised my company to Lady Elara. Perhaps another time. Mira's smile faltered, and Elara saw the flash of rage that lit her sister's eyes before she controlled it. Of course, how thoughtless of me. I will leave you to your conversation. She retreated, but Elara knew the damage was done. Mira would report this to Julian, would spin it as evidence of impropriety, would use it to fuel their conspiracy, but Elara did not let them come. She was done hiding. Alexander murmured, his hand brushing hers as he turned to leave. They will move against you soon, faster than you expect. Then I will be faster, Elara replied. He left her standing in the garden, the scent of roses thick and cloying in the air. She watched him walk away, a pillar of strength in a world of snakes, and she allowed herself a moment of hope. He had loved her once, he had stood by her, had believed her innocent, had tried to save her, and he had failed. This time, she would not let him fail. This time, she would save herself. She turned back toward the house, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing. The Esharves festival was only days away. The hunting period, the dancing, the whisper, the schemes, they would all unfold as they had before. But the ending would be different, the players would be different. And she, Elara of House Valcourt, would write the final act herself. The game was set, and she was ready to play. The morning of the royal hunt broke cold and clear. The sky, brittle blue that promised frost by noon. Elara rose before, her body thrumming with a restless energy that sleep could not touch. She had spent the intervening days in quiet preparation, observing, listening, building a web of informants among the servants whose loyalties had not yet been bought. She knew which maids resented Mira's imperious manner, which grooms had been passed over for promotion, which COOs had hayard whispers in the pantry. She had learned the language of their discontent, and she spoke it fluently. Leanne arrived to help her dress, her hands steadier than they had been since Elara's pointed Dalla Rarning. The handmaiden had not taken Mira's bribe, or if she had, she was hiding it well. Allah did not trust her, would never fully trust anyone again, but she could use her to send messages, to sow confusion, to be the eyes and ears she needed in the enemy's camp. The green riding habit, Elara instructed, her voice calm and unhurried. The one with the silver embroidery, and my mother's emerald pendant. Leanne fetched the garments, her movements efficient and silent. Elara watched her in the mirror, cataloging every flicker of expression, every hesitation. The woman was nervous, but not guilty. That would do. By the time she descended to the courtyard, the hunting Pierotti was assembling in all its splendor. Horses stamped and snorted, their breath pluming in the cold air. Lords and ladies in rich velvets and furs chatted among themselves, their laughter sharp and brittle as glass. And at the center of it all, Julian stood beside Mira, his hand resting possessively on her elbow, his face a mask of aristocratic boredom. Elara felt the familiar twist of hatred in her chest, but she forced a smile onto her lips. She could not afford to show her hand. Not yet. Not when the game was only beginning. Mira called out, her voice bright with false deliorth. I am so glad you decided to join us. I was afraid you might still be unwell. Recovered, as you can see, Ella replied, accepting the reins of her Ameri from the groom. She swung herself into the saddle with practiced ease, her green habit settling around her like armor. I would not miss the hunt for anything. It has been too long since I felt the wind in my hair. Julian's eyes flickered to her, cold and assessing. You seem eager, wife. I trust you will not overexert yourself. I am stronger than I look, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I have learned that strength is often found in the most unexpected places. He opened his mouth to respond, but the blast of a hunting horn cut through the air, and the Pirati began to move. Elara guided her Ameri to the edge of the procession, positioning herself where she could observe without being observed. She watched Mira maneuver her horse beside Julian, watched them exchange whispered words, watched the glances they cast in her direction. They were plotting. Of course they were plotting, but she had already set her own pieces in motion. Alexander rode at the head of the Pirati, his black stallion a study in controlled power. He did not look back, but Elara felt his awareness of her presence like a physical weight. He knew she was there. He was waiting for her signal. The hunt led them through the forest, the trees closing in around them like ancient sentinels. The trail was familiar, the same winding path she had ridden in her former life, the same sun-dappled glades and mossy clearings. She remembered the moment when Mira had engineered her fall, had steered her horse into a hidden route that sent her tumbling to the ground. It was a small injury, a twisted ankle, but it had been enough to leave her behind, to give Julian and Mira the opportunity to plot in private. This time Elara was ready. She urged her my forward, falling into step beside Alexander. Your Highness, she said softly, I would speak with you, privately. He glanced at her, his expression gay-rotted. As this wise, it is necessary, she replied. There is something I must show you. They dropped back from the main Pierotti, their horses' hooves muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. Elara led him off the main trail, following a narrow path that she knew would take them to a small clear ring. The same clear ring where she had stumbled upon Julian and Mira in her former life, but this time, she was not there to spy on them. She was there to set a trap. What is this place? Alexander asked, his voice low and nah. Elara replied, dismounting. A quiet place where we can speak without being overheard. I have information for you, Alexander. Information about your brother. His eyes shined. What information? Elara reached into the saddlebag she had brought, pulling out a sheaf of papers. These are documents I discovered in Julian's study. Correspondence between him and the Duke of Ashford. Plans to undermine your authority, to seize the throne for themselves. Alexander took the papers, his face darkening as he read. This is treason, he said, his voice aired. Your husband is plotting against the crown. Elara agreed, and he is using Mira to do it. They have been meeting in secret, exchanging messages through servants who owe them loyalty. I have names, locations, everything you need to bring them down. Alexander looked up, his eyes searching hers. Why are you telling me this? He is your husband. Because I am not his wife anymore. Elara said, her voice trembling with the intensity of her emotion. I am his victim, his pawn, his sacrifice. He has betrayed me, Alexander, and he will betray you too. I am giving you the weapon you need to destroy him. He stared at her for a long moment, and then he did something she had not expected. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong against her cold ones. I believe you, he said. I have always believed you. I was a fool not to act sooner. You could not have acted, Elara replied, her voice soft. You did not know. None of us knew. I should have, he insisted. I should have seen what he was doing to you. I should have protected you. Protect me now, she said, meeting his gaze. Help me bring them down. He nodded, his jaw set with determination. I swear it on my crown, on my life, on everything I hold dear. I will see them punished for what they have done to you. A rustle in the bushes made them both freeze. Elara's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had anticipated this, she had orchestrated this. The moment had come. Julian stepped out of the undergrowth, his face a mask of cold fury. Mira was behind, her eyes glittering with malice. Julian said, his voice dangerously soft, what a charming tableau. The lady of the house, alone with the crown prince, sharing secrets in the forest. It is not what it looks like, Elara said, her voice calm and measured. It is exactly what it looks like, Julian snarled. You are committing adultery, you treacherous whore. And I will see you punished for it. Alexander stepped forward, his hand dropping to his sword. You will hold your tongue, Valcourt. Your wife and I were engaged in a conversation. Nothing more conversation, Mira echoed, her voice dripping with scorn. Is that what you call it? We saw you. We saw the way you looked at her, the way you touched her. This is an affair, and I will not stand by while my sister is ruined by a man who is not her husband. A cold, sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the tension like a blade. You are so eager to play the wrong sister, Mira. But I have seen the letters you write to Julian. I have seen the plans you make together. You have no loyalty to me. You have never had any loyalty to me. Mira's face went white then red. You lying? Scheming, no, Julian shouted, drawing his own sword. This is not a matter for debate, Elara. You are under arrest. You will be taken to the castle and held for trial on charges of infidelity and conspiracy against the crown. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. It was happening again, the same accusation, the same injustice, the same betrayal. But this time she was not alone. This time, she had prepared. You will not touch her, Alexander said, his voice ringing with authority. I am the crown prince, and I command you to stand down. Your authority is not absolute, Julian sneered. I have the king's ear. And I will have your head for this. But before he could move, the sound of hooves erupted from the forest, and a troop of royal Gorods burst into the clear ring. They surrounded Julian and Mira, their swords drawn, their faces grim. Alexander had not come alone. He had brought his own army, hidden in the woods, waiting for Elara's signal. What is this? Julian demanded, his face contorted with rage. What treachery is this? Treachery, Alexander repeated, his voice cold. You speak of treachery, Valcourt, when you have been plotting against the crown for months. I have the documents, I have the names. I have everything I need to see you hanged. Julian's sword dropped from his hand, clattering to the forest floor. Mira let out a shriek, her composure shattered. This is not possible. This cannot be happening. Elara said, stepping forward. And it is only the beginning. She walked to Julian, close enough to see the fire in his eyes, the same fire he had shown her in the dungeon. You thought you could destroy me, she whispered, her voice soft and deadly. You thought you could take everything from me and leave me to rot in the dark. But I am here, Julian, I am alive. And I will take everything from you. He stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Rema, no, she said, smiling. I am free, the gods dragged them away. Julian, their protests fading into the trees. Alexander came to stand beside Elara, his hand finding hers. He said softly, they will never harm you again. Elara looked at him, her heart racing, her soul alight with a fire that had not burned in years. This is only the first act, she said. There is more to come. Ashford will not take this lying down. He will retaliate. Alexander replied. I am ready for him. And now I have you. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and Elara allowed herself to rest in his embrace. The weight of the past months lifted from her shoulders, and for the first time since her rebirth, she felt something like peace. But she knew it was fleeting. Our was not over. It was only just beginning. And she would fight it with every weapon at her disposal, every ounce of strength, every shred of cunning. She had been given a second chance, and she would use it to carve her name into history. The hunt was over. The battle had just begun. The great hall of Ashford Palace swallowed the morning light whole, its vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows casting elongated shadows across the marble floor. Elara stood at the center of it, her spine straight, her hands clasped before her, her green silk gown a defiant splash of color against the gray stone. She had come alone, without gods, without Alexander, without the heir more of an heir Mai at her back. This was her battle, and she would face it on her own terms. The Duke of Ashford sat upon a raised dais. His thin lips curved into a smile that did not reach his cold, reptilian eyes. He was a tall man, gaunt and sharp-angled, with hair the color of rust, and a voice that slithered through the air like silk over steel. Beside him stood his son, a pale echo of the father, and behind them, a row of advisors whose faces betrayed nothing but regal neutrality. Lady Valcourt, the Duke drawled, leaning back in his chair. What an unexpected honor. I confess I did not anticipate a visit from the wife of a man currently residing in the king's dungeons. Elara inclined her head, a gesture of polite acknowledgement that held no hint of submission. I am no longer Julian Valcourt's wife in any sense that matters. I am here to speak on behalf of myself and the crown. The Duke's smile widened, a predatory flash of yellowed teeth. Bold words for a woman whose husband has been accused of treason. One might wonder if you are here to plead for his life. One would be mistaken, Elara replied, her voice cool and measured. I am here to discuss the documents discovered in Julian's study, documents that bear your seal and your signature. Documents that implicate you in a conspiracy against the crown. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The Duke's smile faltered, just for an instant, before he smoothed it back into place. I have no idea what you are talking about, Lady Val. Your husband was a desperate man. A schemer who would say anything to save his own skin. If he has forged documents, ring my name. It is a pathetic attempt to drag others down with him. Elara reached into the folds of her gown and withdrew a leather-bound folder, its edges worn and stained. She held it up, letting the Duke see the seal that had been broken and fully resealed. These are not forgeries, your grace. They are originals, taken from your own vaults. I have had them examined by the king's own auditors, and they have confirmed their authenticity. The Duke's composure cracked, his eyes flickered to his son, then back to Elara, and she saw the calculation behind his gaze. The frantic reassessment of his position, the desperate search for an escape. You are bluffing, he said, his voice losing its smoothness. You have no authority to access my vaults. I have the authority of the crown prince, Elara said, allowing a hint of steel to enter her voice. Alexander has given me full power to investigate any and all individuals connected to the conspiracy. And I have found more than just letters, your grace. I have found ledgers, transaction records, and a list of names. Names of men who have been paid to undermine the kingdom's security, men who answer to you. The hall erupted into murmurs. The advisors shifted, their regally neutral expressions giving way to unease. The Duke's son took a step back, as if trying to distance himself from the storm that was about to break. This is preposterous, the Duke spat, rising from his chair. You come into my home, a woman alone, and you accuse me of treason based on documents you have fabricated. I will have you arrested. I will have you thrown into the same dungeon where your husband rots. You will do no such thing, Elara said, her voice ringing with a confidence she did not entirely feel. Because if you have me arrested, the documents will be made public, the king will see them, the court will see them, and your allies will abandon you like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The Duke stared at her, his face a mask of relay contained fury. For a long moment, Elara thought he might lunge at her, might try to silence her with violence, but then he laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed off the stone walls. You are more dangerous than I gave you credit for, he said, his voice cold. I underestimated you. I will not make that mistake again. Elara met his gaze without flinching. I am glad we understand each other. Now, here is my proposal. You will publicly renounce your involvement with Julian and Mira. You will testify against them in court. And you will provide the names of every other conspirator. I will see to it that your lands are not confiscated and your family is not destroyed. The Duke's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse, then I will destroy you myself, Elara said, her voice soft and deadly. I will take everything you have, your lands, your titles, your legacy. I will leave you with nothing but the knowledge that you were brought down by a woman you once dismissed as beneath your notice. The silence in the hall was absolute. The Duke's advisors held their breath, waiting for his response. Elara stood firm, her heart pounding, her hands steady. She had gambled everything on this moment, and she would not back down. Finally the Duke spoke. You have made your point, Lady Valcourt. I will consider your proposal. You will do more than consider it, Ra said. You will agree to it. Or I will leave this hall and set the wheels of your destruction in motion. The choice is yours. The Duke's face contorted with rage. Very well, I agree to your terms, but understand this, Lady Valcourt, if you betray me, I will find a way to destroy you, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs, I will see you brought down. Elara smiled, triumphant smile that made the Duke flinch. I have no doubt you will try. But I have been to the depths of hell and back. Your Grace, I am not afraid of you. She turned and walked out of the hall, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her head held high. The doors swung shut behind her, and she allowed herself a single, shuddering breath. It had worked. She had faced the serpent in his nest, and she had emerged victorious. But she knew it was not over. The Duke would not forget this humiliation. He would bide his time, plot his revenge, and strike when she least expected it. She would have to be vigilant, would have to anticipate every move he made. As she descended the steps of Ashford Palace, Alexander Appy read at her side, his face creased with concern. I heard everything, he said, his voice low. You were magnificent. I was terrifying, she replied, allowing herself a small weary smile. But it was necessary. He will keep his word, at least for now. Alexander took her hand, his fingers arm and reassuring. You have done more than anyone could have asked. Rest now. We will deal with the rest tomorrow. Letting him lead her to the carriage. As they drove through the streets of the city, she leaned against him, her eyes closed, her body heavy with exhaustion. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on her, but beneath it, there was a flicker of something new. A fragile hope that she had not felt in years. She had won the first battle. She had exposed the conspiracy, broken the alliance that had destroyed her, and reclaimed her power. But the duel was far from over. There were still enemies to face, truths to uncover, and a future to build. And she would build it on her own terms, with her own strength, and with Alexander at her side. As the carriage rolled through the gates of the palace, Elara opened her eyes and looked out at the world that had once been her prison. It was different now, brighter, more alive, full of possibility. She had risen from the ashes of her former life, and she would not let anyone extinguish her flame. The game was far from over, but she was ready to play. The autumn rain fell in sheets against the leaded glass of the east tower, each drop a soft drumbeat against the ancient stone. Elara stood at the window, her palms pressed flat against the cold pane, watching the gardens dissolve into a blur of grey and green. It had been 3 weeks since the Duke's confession, 3 weeks since Julian and Mira had been dragged from the forest in chains. 3 weeks since she had begun to piece together the shattered fragments of her life. She had expected to feel victorious. She had expected the hollow ache in her chest to fill with the warmth of justice served, the cold fire of revenge finally spent. Instead, she felt nothing but a vast, aching emptiness. The hollow echo of a woman who had lost everything before she had even begun to fight. The trial had been swift. Julian had been stripped of his titles, his lands forfeited to the crown. Mira had been exiled to a convent in the northern reaches, her beauty and her schemes useless against the cold stone walls of her new prison. Adelaide had fled the city, taking what remained of the family fortune with her, and Elara's father, Lord Edric, had died of shame before the verdict was even read, his heart giving out in the night, his last words a whispered apology that Elara had refused to accept. She should have felt satisfaction. She felt only the weight of the silence that had settled over the manor like a shroud. A soft knock at the door roused her from her reverie. She turned, her hand falling from the glass, and found Alexander standing in the doorway, his dark hair damp from the rain, his eyes soft with concern. You have been up here for hours, he said, stepping into the room. The servants are beginning to worry. Let them worry, Elara replied, her voice flat. There is nothing left to fear. Alexander crossed to her, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. Is there nothing left to fear, Elara? Or is there nothing left at all? She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she allowed him to see the cracks in her armor. I have spent so long hating them, she whispered, so long plotting, scheming, dreaming of the moment when they would fall. And now that they have fallen, I do not know who I am without the hatred. Alexander lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. You are Elara of House Valcourt, he said simply. You are the woman who survived the dungeon, who faced the serpent in his nest, who rebuilt herself from the ashes of betrayal. The hatred was a mask, Elara. It was never who you truly were. She closed her eyes, and the tears that she had held back for so long finally spilled down her cheeks. I do not know how to be anything else. Then let me show you, he said, his voice low and fierce. Let me show you who you are when you are not fighting, who you are when you are loved. He drew her into his arms, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him. The clean, sharp scent of rain and wood smoke and something indefinably him. She had dreamed of this moment in the dungeon, had clung to the memory of his eyes, the dew earth of his hand, the promise of his loyalty, but it had been a fantasy. A dream that had sustained her through the darkness. Now it was real. And she did not know how to hold it. I am afraid, she admitted, her voice muffled against his doublet. I am afraid that if I stop fighting, I will fall, that the woman I have become will crumble, and the woman I was will take her place. The fool who trusted, who loved, who believed. Then let her crumble, Alexander said, his hand stroking her hair. Let her crumble. And let the woman you are now rise from the ruins. You are not the same person who walked into that dungeon. You are a stronger, wiser Elara, but you are also still capable of love. I have seen it, I have felt it. She pulled back, looking up at him through blurred eyes. How can you be so sure? Because you love me, he said simply, even when you chose Julian. Even when you thought you had to, you love, and that love did not die in the darkness. It waited, endured, and now it is here, in this room, in this moment, and it is yours to take if you wish. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She had always known that Alexander had loved her, had always known that his loyalty went beyond duty. But she had never allowed herself to believe that she deserved it, that she could have it, that she could be anything other than a vessel for pain and revenge. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the faint roughness of his bar. I have seen so much anger, she said softly, so, I do not know if there is room in my heart for anything else. Then let me make room, he said, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. Let me help you fill it with something other than ash. She laughed then, a broken, watery sound that was half sob and half joy. You are persistent, your highness. I am determined, he corrected, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. There is a difference. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, the rain drumming against the windows like a distant high beat. Elara felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, felt the knot of anger in her chest loosen, just a fraction. It was not forgiveness, it was not peace, but it was a beginning. She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. There is something I must do, she said. Something I have been putting off. Alexander's expression shifted, becoming gay-rotted. What is it? I need to go to the garden, she said. There is something I left behind, something I need to find. He did not ask what it was, he simply nodded and offered her his arm. Then let us go find it together. The garden was drenched in rain, the roses beaten down by the force of the storm, their petals scattered across the soaked earth like drops of blood. Elara walked through the mud, her gown dragging behind her, her eyes fixed on the old stone bench that stood beneath the crumbling arbor. It was the same bench where she had sat with Mira, the same spot where she had set her trap, the same place where she had first begun to weave her web of revenge. But it was also the place where she had once dreamed of the future, where she had imagined a life of love, of simple joys. The dreams had been stolen, crushed, buried under the weight of betrayal, but they had not died, they had simply waited. She knelt beside the bench, her hands sinking into the cold, wet earth. She dug for a moment, her fingers scraping against something hard. She pulled it free, a small, rusted box, its hinges stiff with age. She had hidden it here years ago, a child's treasure. A piece of her mother's legacy that she had wanted to keep safe from the world. She opened the box, and inside was a single item, a small, sea-eyed bird, its wings outstretched, its body painted in faded shades of blue and gold. It had been her mother's, a token of hope and freedom, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way to fly. Elara held the bird in her palm, feeling the weight of it, the smoothness of the wood worn by years of handling. She remembered her mother's voice, soft, whispering that she would always be free, that no one could cage her spirit, that she was born to soar. I have been flying toward revenge for so long, Elara murmured, her voice barely audible above the rain. I forgot that I was also flying toward something else. Alexander knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. What is that? She looked at him, the bird cradled between them, and she felt the knot in her chest finally, truly begin to unravel. She said, I was flying toward hope. He smiled, a slow radiant smile that lit up his eyes. And have you found it? Elara looked at the bird, then at the man who had waited for her through death and rebirth. through hatred and despair. She thought of the dungeon, of the cold stone and the rat that had nibbled at her fingers. She thought of the trial, the betrayal, the long lonely months of dying. And then she thought of this moment, of the rain on her face and his hand in hers, of the future that stretched out before her like an open sky. I think, she said slowly, I have found the beginning of it. She rose to her feet, the bird clutched in her hand, and she looked out over the rain-soaked Giaraden. The storm was beginning to break, the clouds pirouetting to reveal a sliver of pale blue sky. The world was wet and cold and full of shadows, but it was also alive, vibrant, full of possibility. Alexander stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. What now? Elara turned to him, her eyes clear. Now, she said, I learn to live, not to survive. Not to five. He took her hand, and together they walked back toward the manor, their footsteps leaving twin trails in the mud. The rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the Giaradens. Elara paused at the threshold, looking back at the bench, the arbor, the scattered roses. She had come to this place as a woman broken and burning, driven by rage and a thirst for vengeance. She was leaving it as something else, still scared, but no longer defined by the wounds of her past. She tucked the wooden bird into the pocket of her gown, close to her hair, and stepped through the door. The dungeon was gone, the darkness was gone, and she was finally truly free.